really are. By the word that means I honor that which is the Atman, or the pure light, or the essence, or here and nowness, or Buddha consciousness, or Christ consciousness, or however you want to label it, within you. Everybody's got it. We are all it. I honor that in you. I'm reminding you of who you really are. The word is namaste, namaste, and therefore before we start the bhajan, may I say to all of you, namaste. Tonight we're going to do a bhajan which uses only one word, Rama. Rama. Rama is the name of an incarnation of God. Rama is the God of the Sun Kingdom. He's all and everything. He's pure light. He resides in your heart, in your hridayam. Ra, sun, ma, earth. The conjunction of male and female, all the union, the yin-yang, Rama, 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 Rama. I will give you the melody, and as you feel in tune with the melody, if you feel like making sound, make it. If it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Rama, 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 Rama,
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and Ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and Ramdas.org. Welcome to Ramdas Here and Now, and I'm Raghu Marcus. This week we are going to have a subject, or a talk, whose subject is, a talk by Ramdas, whose subject is reflections on suffering. That's certainly common denominator for everybody. Everybody that's got a human body, that is endemic to us all, suffering. Remember the Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. Ram Dass actually talks about that a little bit in this talk, and I just wanted to bring my own take on some of what he was talking about. It's interesting because over the years, I mean, he talks here about if you're to see someone else's beauty, you first have to be able to acknowledge your own beauty. Isn't that a huge one? And in a similar way, if you're going to be able to be available for someone else's suffering, you have to acknowledge your own suffering. I mean, that is a prerequisite, both of those things, to be able to be of any service to anybody around us. And I do remember in my own life just being in a lot of pain, certainly when I was a kid, and into my teens and so on and so forth, until I found the path of inner acknowledgement. Let's put it that way. Because many of us, it takes a while till we even acknowledge that there is something that can help transform the suffering. And as well acknowledging that who we are deeply behind all of the roles that we play and all of the ways that we identify ourselves. Identifying that which is wants beauty, wants love, wants to be of help to anybody, wants peace, wants compassion. It's moving into that identification, which is really something that happened, and in my case, obviously, when I met Ram Dass, and and he spoke about how all of his own foibles and all of his own caughtness, and we all could relate with that. But it was when I got to India, and it's funny when, we all have these weird names. I mean, they're not weird anymore. But, when Maharaji did give me my name, it was not Raghu. It was, Raghu is like a nickname. It was Raghvendra Das. And I got this name, and I was on the train after that, and some Indian people were in the cabin that I was in. I had just gotten the name, and I'm like, wow, this is a great name, but wow, who could pronounce this thing? What am I going to do with this? And these people said, what is your good name? And I thought, okay, perfect. Indian people, no problem. They're going to get it. And I said, Raghvendra Das. And they went, huh? Could you please repeat? And I realized, okay, I'm pretty well screwed on this one. So it became Raghu, but the level at which I was meaning to talk about it is that I started to relate with that human being inside me that was not controlled by ego identity. And that's probably the reason that Maharaji gave us these names, so that we could move and transform. Of course, then it turned out I'm back in America and Canada, and I'm going to use this name. Nobody's going to call me by my real name, which is Mitchell. And I started saying, don't call me that. Call me Raghu. And people wouldn't even get that. So I ended up going, spaghetti sauce. They get that. So I became Raghu of spaghetti sauce, which, interesting self-identification. What else is he talking about? We're talking about the second noble truth, the cause of suffering. And Ram Dass talks about the clinging of the mind. And using one example is aging, right? Suffering comes into one who is aging if they are trying to hold on to youth. And isn't that the nature of this culture that worships youth? And it's, pretty tribal. You're over, well, used to be if you're over 30, you're finished. Now maybe it's 40. Yeah, we all worshipped at that altar. And Ram Dass put out a book, I don't know, 10, 15, 12 years ago, something like that, called Still Here. Fantastic book, by the way, about aging and the suffering with that. I was with him one time. I had gotten into it. I was about in the middle of that book, and I said, Ram Dass, I can't take one more sentence of this book. It is absolutely killing me, because I am so caught in every one of these examples of holding on. It's like making me sick. He laughed. But isn't that a great example of clinging? I mean, and that clinging extends outward to just about every aspect of life. So what else did we talk about here? Once you start to awaken, you start to look at your own life as now how it will help you grow. And then you see that the reason you're suffering is because of the way you're clinging, going back to the clinging. But you end up using all of that as transformational material. That's really what Tantra is, by the way. It's not about, what they call California Tantra, which is fun and games, sexual love-making at its extreme, and, which is not a bad thing either. But this Tantra we're talking about is being able to merge with that which is in duality, so that you come out the other side, basically. And that's a very, very gross definition of that, folks, so don't quote me there, but certainly the idea that you use suffering to transform your life it's been something that has been really prominent in the teachings that certainly that I have gone through, and I love the Tibetans, especially the Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and have gone to many, including His Holiness. I think I've mentioned that before. Just the science of mind and the way that they deal with this, and the antidotes that they have to all of these really disturbing thoughts and emotions and so on, is amazing. And of course, Ram Dass gives many of this instruction through the years and years of talks and lectures that he's been giving that are very invaluable. In fact, a little prelude to a wonderful book that's coming out next year that's going to be all about how to be here now. So we'll talk more about that as it comes along. It's just being finished. Ram Dass is just finishing working on it. At the end of this part of the talk that he gives, he reads a letter by this lama who was dying and wrote to his one of his best friends. It's just an incredible letter. And the end of it is a poem, and this is the end of the poem, where he basically asks his friend to cultivate, and this is really for everybody, cultivate the precepts of transforming bad circumstances, the experiences of your suffering, those bad circumstances, which are the experiences of your suffering, into the very path of awakening. Again, using your day-to-day confrontation with pain, suffering, into awakening. Now, of course, for the little things, we can really, we can get into that. And then for the larger things where people are passing and people are suffering from various diseases that are causing tremendous pain, this is not so easy, but it is something to bear down on in terms of really listening to how we can transform these emotions and these thoughts and the pain and the suffering. So this is this lecture is called Reflections on Suffering, and it's excellent. So another thing is this cultivate term. I love that term, and it's Ram Dass uses it here. Actually, there's a meditation at some point called Meditation on Suffering and Forgiveness. But the cultivation term is appropriate right now, and I will mention this before we get into this talk by Ram Dass. We've just finished a film that we've edited. Film meaning it's a long-form teaching from Ram Dass, Krishna Das, Sharon Salzberg, and Mirabai Bush called Cultivating Loving Awareness. And it's central if you've been at all tuning into Ram Dass's webcasts or some of the other material on the site. It's the essence of what he has been putting forth in the last year and a half or so about moving from identification with ego in your mind to the spiritual heart, to the true self, soul, whatever it is that you want to call that place. And he talks about unconditional love and, what loving awareness is and how you can be in that perch and be able to see your life in a different way and relate to people in a completely people environment, and so on, in a completely different way. It's an invaluable film. And on November 13th, it's going to be premiered alongside of a chat in the evening around 7:30 with Krishna Das and Ram Dass taking questions. So that's something I wanted to give everybody a heads up for. And you can go to ramdass.org and you can find the link there to sign up for it. It's free. We just, as we do with this podcast, all of this is only possible because of people like you that are supporting the Love Serve Remember Foundation, Ram Dass's foundation, representing Maharaji, basically, and everything that's come through to many people, not just Ram Dass teachers, from Krishna Das to other teachers like Sharon and Danny Goleman and so on. So enough talk, and please do go over to the site and check this whole thing out. Meanwhile, listen to this very insightful talk from Ram Dass here and now.
Now, one of the things that makes relationships so difficult is the way in which we protect ourselves from suffering, from our own and from each other's. Because when you love somebody, you don't want to lay your suffering on them and your fears. And also you're afraid that if you open your heart too far, their suffering will overwhelm you. Because when you look at the world, you just see suffering everywhere. If you scratch the surface of every person in this room, you will find that there is some suffering. And some people who are walking around here smiling at each other and sitting down and having wonderful, gentle conversations, inside have very, very deep pain and deep fear. But they have learned so well how to mask it from each other. And the culture reinforces that, saying, don't bring your pain to me. I only want your happiness. I'll put up with a little bit of it, but not much of it, because you'll scare me. Now, just as I said before, that if you are going to be able to see somebody else's beauty, you have to be able to acknowledge your own beauty. In a similar way, if you are going to be able to be available for someone else's suffering, you have to be able to acknowledge your own suffering and be able to understand the nature of suffering in such a way that you have converted the quality of suffering in yourself. Gurdjieff, the Russian philosopher, said there is nothing that can be attained spiritually without suffering in life. But at the same time, if you are going to proceed on the journey, you must sacrifice suffering. You hear that dual nature of it. You have to have suffered, because the suffering is what burns through you and deepens the compassion and opens the door. Suffering brings you closer to the mystery. And at the same moment, if you hold on to the suffering and grab at it and sort of wallow in it or cling to it, it stops the journey. There is an understanding of suffering such that you don't invite suffering into your life, but when it comes, you work with it and transform it. I mean, the extreme of it is the Christian monk who's saying, God, God, give me more pain. Give me more suffering, because I want to get closer to you. And Maharaji's saying, do you like suffering or joy? And saying, I love suffering, it brings me so close to God. To understand the nature of suffering is the precondition for being able to convert it, to see the way in which suffering is grace. That suffering is a gift that's given to you to allow you to come home. Because the understanding is contained in the Buddha's first three Noble Truths. First one is there is suffering. Birth has suffering, death has suffering, sickness has suffering, aging has suffering, not getting what you want has suffering, getting what you don't want has suffering. Even getting what you want has suffering because it's in time and it's going to corrupt. So there's fear even in having what you want. So there's suffering inherent in being in form, is the base rule. It's just built into it. It's not that Buddha was a downer. He was just pointing out, because people are so busy denying it, he was pointing out that that's an inherent nature of form. There is suffering. But then his second noble truth is the crux of the matter. He said the cause of suffering in all of this is the clinging of mind. It's like you watch people age. I can feel as I age that the suffering would come if I held on to my youth. But to the extent that I open to these new sensations and see, like if I could run the 4-minute mile in 10 minutes, And then as I get older, I can only run the 4-minute mile in 20 minutes. If I'm living in a culture which only measures my adequacy in terms of how fast I run the 4-minute mile, do you realize that age is my enemy? You realize that what I'm doing is making nature my enemy. I'm making the nature of things my enemy. Do you see the inherent problem in living in a culture which worships youth, which worships all of the qualities of power? It's a hunting and gathering. It's a hunting tribe. Hunting tribe. And so the peak years are, I don't know, 18, 20 to 40, something like that. And then from then on, it's all downhill. And medical science allows us now to go on and on and on and on. So it's just slowly going down and down and down. If down is measured by these very narrow values, and if you look at the advertising in our culture, except for IRAs and insurance, the numbers of images of older people are very, very few. They're treated as a minority group and given a certain fraction, just out of to keep the Retired People's Association from getting up in arms politically. But now you can look at the essence of what the issue is. The issue is not the growing old. The issue is the clinging to a model of anything. Like you cling to a model of what beauty is. The fun I have is playing with that issue in the culture. Because as I always say in my lectures, I look at this hand, and you look at this hand now, and it's all getting wrinkled, and there's these blood veins and bones showing. There used to be all this skin. You never noticed that stuff, and now it's all wrinkly, and it's got spots on it. It's really incredible. I mean, just as an aesthetic experience, you know, if I didn't think it was my hand, just looking at that, it's really quite beautiful. I mean, it's got real character. And I love these spots, you know, they're really far out, these spots like these, you know. And I love that in the culture, the Porcelana ad, it says, they call these aging spots, I call them ugly, says a woman as she's putting on Porcelana cream, see? And it's interesting that as you flip your consciousness and just start to allow the processes of nature to happen and stop pitting yourself against them, you're able to say, they call these ugly. I call them aging spots. And there's just a kind of a relaxed appreciation of change instead of this feeling like it's all downhill and, oh, I used to be able to walk and now I can't walk, I've got to sit. It's interesting about aging. I mean, what have you been doing all week? You sit, you draw your awareness in from your ears and from your eyes, you follow your breath. Look what happens when you get old. You lose your hearing, you lose your sight, you got arthritis, you can't move. It's an absolutely perfect time for meditating. It's as if God were giving you a little message saying, don't you think it's time? You looked inside and you're saying, no, we're all young and you're busy being young. Well, now it's wonderful to stay vital and stay active and stay all that and to take care of your body and treat it with respect and enjoy it. If you look at the myths of old age in this culture, it is showing all old people acting like young people and saying, isn't that wonderful? Well, it's wonderful and it stinks both. Because it is creating myths that create suffering. And myths that create suffering are evil. Because they increase paranoia and separateness. And I think there are really interesting, there's such unconsciousness in the way our culture works. And when you begin to be a little conscious, you can hardly bear what you're seeing, that it's all different than you thought it was. Now, So that the second noble truth is the clinging to the suffering. The clinging of mind is what creates the suffering. You watch it in dying. If people are holding to life, they're suffering about dying. If people are wishing they were dead, if they have a model they wish they were dead, they're suffering in living. If they wish they were rich, they're suffering because they're poor. And I have been with people now in other cultures where, you know, it absolutely disoriented me for many, many times in India when I saw people who had so little that they were so far below our poverty line in this culture. And when I looked into their eyes, I saw a quality of peace and a quality of joy that I didn't see in the upper middle class in America. And it knocked into a hat the whole model I had, that somehow there was an equation between economics and wealth and happiness. Now, that doesn't mean you deny that reality. There is a relative reality about it, and for many people that's true. That's why you were got to recognize that different people suffer in different ways, and for you to interpret someone else's suffering on the basis of whether you would suffer in that condition is a fallacy. That you cannot assume that somebody else is suffering just because you would suffer in that circumstance. Or the opposite. Yes. And so that's where it becomes interesting that when you have learned to convert your own suffering, it is still not fair or appropriate to assume that someone else either wants to or can convert their suffering. And their suffering is very real for them. And you have to listen in each case to hear what the nature of the suffering is and how you alleviate it. As long as you're identified with your suffering, all you're hearing is your empathy about another person's suffering and your pity and your reactivity to their suffering, not your responsiveness to their suffering. And the game is to be responsive rather than reactive to suffering. So that once you begin to awaken, you start to look at your own life as how will it help me grow, and then you see that the reason you are suffering is because of the way your mind is clinging. And so that suffering starts to be a clue to you of the way your mind is clinging, and otherwise you wouldn't notice that clinging. And since you would like to work with letting go of the clingings of mind, you begin to treasure the suffering because it shows you. You treasure the anger because it shows you that a model you had was just disconfirmed. And when you get angry, when you get frustrated, when you in all the ways you suffer, those are all clues to you that your secret stash of clinging of mind was just uncovered. And you look and you say, caught me again. And in a way, you get in, like for me, it's a dialogue with Maharaji, where every time I'm caught in suffering, I see he's just chiding me, saying, oh, you think you're so free? Try this one on. Try this. And it's interesting, especially when you start to deal with people who have dramatic life shifts, where they get a diagnosis or something like that that changes the whole meaning of their life. The question of how much they'll suffer is how quickly they can let go of who they used to be and be who they are now. To the extent that Kelly holds on to a model of himself as having the same body as you have, he is going to suffer. To the extent that he opens and says, this is what I'm working with, this is it, it's no better or worse, it's what I've got, then he doesn't suffer. That's a hard one, because it looks, your projection into him is that he must suffer because of that body, because you would suffer because of your attachment to your flexibility and freedom and so on. But can you imagine, I mean, from a bird's point of view, we must all be suffering terribly. I mean, look at those poor things, my God. And that's true. A human body is suffering. Just going into one is a real drag. I mean, you may feel really light and all, but wait, it'll decay. And even when it's feeling light, it's so limited, you can't do a lot of things with it. It's really a kind of a ponderous process, you know. Now, dealing with suffering is not, you know, it's hard work. It's hard work. I'm not trying to make it all light and ha, and isn't this all fun? This is damned hard work. And just these two quotes. One of these from Aeschylus. It says, pain falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. The awful grace of God. In other words, that part of us which is separate is screaming about the suffering. The part of us that's awakening is working to extract the wisdom from it. And it is an intense, a profoundly intense experience. And it is an experience in which suffering brings people closest to the possibility of awakening. That is what is so addictive to me about working with people that have diseases, that have all kinds of things, like I'm working with AIDS people more and more, that are people that are dying as they're approaching death, because those are the moments when their models are collapsing, when they are most ripe for a spiritual awakening. That's the most exciting time. When everybody's got it going just right, they are fast asleep into their models for the most part. It's interesting because it really flips the game around, and you begin to see in the way in which suffering awakens. And then when you want to be an instrument for helping people awaken and want to awaken yourself through being with other awakening people, you gravitate towards people that are suffering. Not because you're a sadist or because of anything, just not from a psychological thing, from a spiritual point of view, because it's where the most living force is in human relations. And yet everybody, out of their fear, is making believe it's not happening. We're working on it. We're working on it step by step, bit by bit. Now, this is a very powerful letter from Lama Yeshe, who died recently, who was a very fine Tibetan Lama. And he became very ill. And this shows, here was somebody who had deep spiritual practices, and he had a hard time. And I want you to hear it, because I want you to hear that it isn't easy. But follow the letter through to its course. Some of the language is a little alien to you, because he's speaking to a fellow Lama. He's written a letter to a fellow Lama. Due to my right and left, I got this from Jack Kornfield, by the way. Due to my right and left channels being filled with the violent movement of thought winds and overflowing out of control beyond the capacity of my ordinary heart to cope with it, and in order to safeguard myself, I was forced to place this difficult-to-find body of leisure and endowments in the hands of a strange doctor. Upon examining for half an hour, he advised that I must definitely go into the intensive care unit of the hospital. Believing that this was the case, I asked him to protect my life. Never have I known the experiences and sufferings which then followed. First, unending injections throughout the day and night. Second, because the capacity of my heart to pump oxygen was impaired, and in order to breathe, I used an oxygen tank from which a tube ran through my nose. This was never disconnected, the only way I could breathe, and caused great discomfort day and night. Third, I had to constantly take other medicines, sometimes more than 10 pills at a time, many times a day. Due to this medication, my body was powerlessly overcome by pain every 2 hours, and my memory degenerated. I had no appetite for more than a month, and whatever food I did eat, I threw up and suffered further. Some days, I could not do even the slightest bit of my prayers. My cousin came to see me, and I asked him to recite the mandala of the regeneration of the body, and listened with great effort. But often in my mind's confusion, my speech would become garbled. I would laugh at myself and then weep and be sad. I experienced and understood the confused mind in the deepest way, even in regards to the merest effort to say a sentence. It is extremely difficult to maintain understanding and balance without becoming confused during the stages of death, when the inner elements are being absorbed. It was at this time that I felt the power of my mind really degenerating. When I tried to think about different things and ideas, my mind became confused. It had been 41 days since I became ill. The condition of my body was such that I had become the lord of a cemetery. My mind was like that of an anti-god, and my speech like the barkings of an old mad dog. Now I still take 16 pills a day, and because I must depend on others for moving about and sleeping, and because my hand still shakes when I write, please, my dear Dharma brother, read this letter depending on the meanings intended and not upon the mere words spoken. These experiences I am relating to you, my pledged spiritual brother. Keep them from hard-headed logicians. In other words, don't let people who wouldn't understand it hear this. After my ability to recite prayers of ordinary words degenerated, and after these great sufferings, I considered what to do. Finally, I began stabilizing meditation with strong mindfulness and introspection. I am grateful for the years of training I had. By the power of this, there began to arise some clarity of mind. Within this state, I continued stabilizing meditation with great effort, and this was of much benefit, though the enemies of lethargy and confusion often overcame my meditation. I was reminded of the time we received the teachings together, my brother, from our Guru, and all of the kindnesses that have been bestowed upon me in this lifetime. During this time, though I received hundreds of letters, I was not allowed to read them, but thinking of you, the strength of my mind increased and my problems have lessened. So I end with a poem that I've written for you. Practice and meditate, training the heart, the sole remedy for coming to terms with our sufferings. The main object of cultivation of awe-inspiring yogis, path followed by great saints of all ages. You need a happy mind, a conscientious mind, and an open heart. Especially you must learn to cultivate the precepts of transforming bad circumstances, the experiences of your suffering, into the very path of awakening.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate all the support for the foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to ramdas.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. Welcome to Ram Dass Here and Now, and I'm Raghu Marcus for another edition. This is the second part of this Reflections on Suffering, which Ram Dass did this talk, I think in '87. So, 25 years ago. And, just connected with me pretty deeply, because he opens this thing, or at least the second part, we open it with him talking about all of life is preparation for the moment of death, and talking about how when you get to that state where you're transferring, you experience all of the elements leaving, and he gives a description of that. And, it's hitting me because some of you may remember a couple of podcasts ago, I did this podcast from Santa Fe, where my father lives, and he's going through this transition, transferring to the next stage. And he was supposed to leave when I got there, and this was late September and early October and mid-October. And he didn't, and he's still here. And it did give an opportunity, though, for me to really ponder this stuff and just watch, these significant attachments that we need to deal with at the very end of life. So for anybody who is going through stuff like this with family, friends, parents, whatever, there's some really, amazing stuff in here. Basically what he's saying and what we've experienced and what we do experience is that everything that we go through is it's like the art of dying, he calls it. And it's just a way we all have to deal with suffering, and we all have to deal with the clinging that goes along with it. And and he talks about it being the optimum game is to understand, and if you have that vantage point where you see your life day to day as it's every day is another lesson that allows us to disengage from that identification with our suffering. So crucial stuff, because eventually we're all headed there. And one of the great things he mentions here is he tells just the example of Maharaji. When Ram Dass was first in India, and this story's been told a million times, and we do probably in this podcast and in other transmissions that come through ramdas.org, some of these things are mentioned more than once, and Ram Dass mentions them multiple times over the years in these different lectures, but always in one way or another a little bit different, and sometimes we hear them where we didn't hear them before in a way that really rings true. But when Ram Dass, and everybody knows again the story of Ram Dass giving Maharaji 1,200 micrograms of LSD, and that's way more than anybody's ever taken, except, I don't know, maybe Ram Dass. He took a lot of acid back in the day, and nothing happened. Nothing happened, and nothing happened because Maharaji's awareness had nothing to grab onto. There was absolutely no clinging. And it reminds me of my own, one of my own experiences, slightly embarrassing here, folks, but I'll share it. I did have a trip way back when, in those days, where I had some extraordinarily pure acid. I don't think it was nowhere near 1,200 mics, or I don't think I'd be here today, but it was powerful. It was from Czechoslovakia at the time. I don't know how we knew that, but anyhow, I went through the true death of ego, and looking back on it, I was in a pretty good spot, and this is before I met Ram Dass, and before I had any kind of grip on the spiritual path, really. Although I had been doing TM, and I met Mayor Baba through his picture. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of clinging. I was fine, and I was riding. Okay, we're just free now. Free, no body, no problem. And then at one moment, suddenly, a thought came into my head. From where, I have no idea. But the thought was, shit, no body, no getting laid anymore. And I completely freaked out at that fact. Shows you where I was at. And anyhow, I was gone for a couple of hours into some paranoid, horrible bummer that was really, I'll never forget it to this day. I ended up in a club in Montreal, where I'm from, with a band called the Fugs, which were these poet crazy men from the Lower East Side of New York, Thule Cooperberg, who died just recently. And anyhow, they were pretty insane, and I happily went insane with them. But just it goes to show, I mean, that was the thing that I clung to. I could not accept leaving the body, where that would be a big thing that we would leave behind. I guess it's a big thing for everybody, isn't it? So that's a great little example. Maharaji, absolutely nothing happened because there's nothing there to happen to. So, what else are we talking? He's talking about, yeah, and that's the thing about suffering happens to somebody. If you are somebody, you're going to suffer. If you're not attached to your somebody-ness, you don't suffer. And of course, that's a high aspiration for us to get to. And but that is what spiritual work, again, the art of dying in the present moment, without the clinging of mind, is what the game is. And these things are said, and listen, we hear it as much as we can hear it in the moment that we hear it, and we practice. We become conscious as we can get, and then in another moment, you hear it way more clear, with way more clarity. And I like these comments he makes too, about suffering that's occurred in your life. It's part of what's allowed you to be here today, and it's part of what forms you. Isn't that true? I mean, the suffering gets, as he talks, it gets burned into you, and and it deepens you. And of course, you don't want to have suffering. You don't want to have anyone else have suffering. But these things really make you deepen the substance of your being. And it's all about just getting that vantage point. I have, spent many a moment getting lost in one type of suffering or another. Some of the stuff you go back, just simple stuff, not getting what you want. And once you have that vantage point, things absolutely change. And what is really interesting here is the stuff that he's talking about. And most especially, Ram Dass is talking about in this talk. Talking about protecting yourself from pain, and we all do this. And it's not just your own pain; it's the pain of others. When you see others suffering, you're protecting your separateness. You're protecting that part of you that can't take. It hurts so much to see other people suffering, and innately you have a tremendous generosity of heart, which in the heart, as he says, knows no boundaries. And the interesting thing here is what I find, Ram Dass, as those of you who know, who've been taking a look at what's being offered through ramdass.org, and of course most recently and right after next week, this podcast is, I think it's going to come out when November 9th or something like that, in the next few days. And on the 13th, and this is to let everybody know, this wonderful film that we did, that's taken from the Open Your Heart retreats in Maui, is going to be debuted, all about cultivating loving awareness. And he was talking 25 years ago. He was talking about this stuff. And this film is all about identifying with your heart space rather than your ego. And in this thing, he's talking about the deepest part of your heart is an instrument of unity. It knows we are all one. It is our minds that put up the separateness. And it talks about identifying with the heart. So this has been a theme for a very long time that has come to a certain culmination in this particular offering, cultivating a loving awareness, and what Ram Dass is, what he's talking about and where he's coming from these days. And ultimately, as he says here, the balance of the heart and the higher wisdom, or we can call it human heart and deeper heart, that balance is where the saving grace is. And you can't deny your humanity, your human heart, but you don't want to deny your divinity, and that's what everybody is here about. And going back a little bit, I also want to connect up the interesting stuff when he talks about suffering and talks about separateness, and talks about really being in the moment, and when you are tested, and then you're faced with whatever practice that you have done in this life to disengage yourself from being identified with ego. And didn't he go through this, 15, 16 years ago with the stroke that he had, and what he has called it, which is fierce grace. And so he was able to put into practice this stuff that's in this talk about suffering. He was forced to put this into practice by virtue of this extraordinary experience. Basically, he died and came back, and then had to deal with losing the, in India it's called siddhi, which means spiritual power. I mean, he had that spiritual power of talk. He was able to synthesize all sorts of ideas and spiritual practices and philosophy and human psychology in a way that very few other people have done to this day. And it was gone. So just think of the tremendous suffering that he went through, and how that got pulled out of him. Talk about dying, and the water element goes, the air element goes, your breath goes, and all of that goes, and you're stuck with it. Hopefully you can disengage from that and not be caught in it, and not have fear. Well, what about, you're losing the ability to talk. He had to relearn how to talk. I mean, you hear, I'm sure most of you who are listening to this have heard him lately, since his stroke, and since he's been in Maui, which has been, it's going, I think, 7 years at this point, where he hasn't left Maui, basically. And he had to relearn it all. And, of course, now where he's coming from is the true substance of living in the spiritual heart, in that place where he is now, seeing everything. I don't want to get too laudatory here. Of course, Ram Dass isn't listening to this, so I can do what I want. But it's truly amazing. I do speak to him on a regular basis, and he's got still all sorts of physical problems, and there's a lot of suffering involved. He's just not attached to it. So he's living proof that you can get to a place where you do not identify with that suffering. I mean, it's a great example for us, but let's go forward here, and we'll finish this listening to his talk, reflecting on suffering, reflections on suffering. And here is Ram Dass, here and now.
And you can now understand what I've said before, which was that why in the East all of life is seen as preparation for the moment of death. Because at the moment of death, when you experience the earth element leaving and you feel a heaviness, when you experience the water element leaving and you feel dryness, when you experience the fire element leaving and you experience coldness, when you experience the air element leaving and you experience your out-breath longer than your in-breath, when all of these are happening, they are so profound. Unless your mindfulness is strong, you will get lost into being thirsty or being cold. And that is the way you will die at that moment. And that is what propels you onward. And the art of dying in the present moment without the clinging of mind is exactly what the optimum game is when you understand reincarnation. But to do that, you have to have been able to transform the sufferings along the way and keep working with the more intense ones and more intense ones and more intense ones. And it's interesting that, like when Maharaji took 1,200 micrograms of LSD and nothing happened, the reason nothing happens is because his awareness, there's nothing for it to grab onto. There's no hooks, there's nothing clinging. And so the sufferings only happen to somebody. If you're somebody, you suffer. If you're not attached to your somebodyness, you don't suffer. It's just change, and change is flow, and you're flowing with the flow. You're not busy being somebody. The minute you try to stand somewhere, you're on tiptoe, you will suffer. Now, in this quality of suffering and the clinging of mind, and the third noble truth, of course, is you let go of the clingings of mind and you end the suffering until you're just this awareness and these phenomena occur. It's just like pain is just strong stimulus until you label it as pain. And your awareness gets so quiet. And at that point, you're really starting to be able to transform your own sufferings. And at that moment, you look back at your history and you see the way in which the sufferings that have occurred in your life have been part of what allowed you to be here today. That the way they burned into you and the way they deepened you and the way they made you ready so you didn't end up so superficial. And it's extraordinary. It's bizarre. You almost feel like you're perverse when you look at people that aren't suffering in a life and you begin to feel compassion. It's really strange because they're staying at such a superficial level of life. And you don't wish suffering on anybody. And you're dealing with this paradox, this continuous paradox, that suffering in yourself you don't want, but when you get it, you work with it and you see its grace even though you don't want it. And you grow with it. That you can handle. That one, that's paradoxical, but you barely can handle it. But suffering of somebody you love or suffering of other human beings is a whole other ballgame. And you may intellectually know that suffering is grace, but when your child is sick, or when your partner is sick, or when, somebody else is suffering, it is extremely hard to say, well, it's all grace. And your human heart wants to do everything you can to take away their suffering. And when you listen quietly inside, you listen to that paradox, and you live with that tension. You live with the fact that you doing something? You live with that paradox of the human heart. That the human heart is empathizing with suffering and is empathizing with suffering of a separate entity. Because the human emotional heart's part of your separateness. And when somebody else is suffering, it rips your human heart to shreds. That's what you were referring to yesterday. And you want to do everything you can to relieve the suffering, and there's so much of it that you end up, it's unbearable. And what you do is you armor your heart. You've got to protect your heart from the suffering. If to the extent that you identify only with your separateness, you have to protect yourself. You're protecting yourself in no questions this moment. I want to finish this sequence. You protect yourself in two ways at once. One is you're protecting yourself from the pain of others because you can't do something, but you can't take away their suffering, and it hurts you so much to see them suffering. And the other thing is you're protecting your separateness from the innate generosity of your heart, which would give away everything. Because the heart doesn't know boundaries. The deepest heart isn't an instrument of separateness. The deepest part of your heart is an instrument of unity. The deepest part of your heart, your conscious heart, your compassionate heart, your intuitive, deep heart, it knows that we are all one. It lives in that universe. It is our minds that puts up the separateness. Our minds are the instruments of our separateness. Our hearts are the doorways to our unity. So that the heart, unprotected, will just keep you suffering. It's not your suffering, it's our suffering. And here, take it. Take my house, take my car, take my life, take it all. What difference does it make? Because it's our suffering. How can I go on when you're suffering? Because there's no you and there's no me. And the mind is saying, now, wait a minute. Think about tomorrow. After all, you've got the separateness to consider. And so what we really have is a dialogue going on between the mind, which is an instrument, our thinking mind, which is an instrument of our separateness, and our compassionate heart, which is an instrument of our unity. So it's the dialogue between separateness and unity that's being fought out inside ourselves between the mind and the heart. And the mind throws a fish out now and then by what's called professional warmth, of pity and kindness and doing good, but doing good from a safe place, doing good so that you don't threaten the integrity of the separate entity. But can you see that as you identify more and more with that in you, which is part of everything, the need to protect that separateness gets less and less, and you can let yourself more into the stream. You can start to swim. You can go in a little deeper. You can, because you learn how to swim a little. You don't have to just wade at the edge. You can start to go into the water of the universe of suffering more. I mean, I can now, I don't know whether I'm doing it with defense or truth. I really don't know yet, because I just got to keep listening and watching my body and my emotions and all that. But in fact, in the past week, or any week you take in my life, I am dealing with really the most traumatic experiences that human beings can face. And people are calling me with crises, and they're just presenting them because I invite them. And what I find is that what I offer them is, first, my heart is breaking for their pain. And I would take it if I could, but I can't. But what I am is somebody that at the same moment as my heart hurts, I have a very, very deep appreciation of the lawful nature of things, and that is at some other level, not the human personality level, at another level, it is at a spiritual level, that is the curriculum that person needs to have. It is optimum for them. And it's not Pollyanna-ish. I can feel it is rooted in an absolute depth of understanding of Dharma, for me. I mean, as deep as I've been able to get. A sense of the rightness of people's life experiences, even as traumatic as they might be. And that is so deeply imbued in me now that I am able to be with somebody that's suffering, and they feel that my heart hurts because I'm a human with them, and at the same moment there is an equanimity in me, and often that rubs off, and they begin to relax a little bit because they begin to get a sense that there is another way of being with what's happening to them, in a way that doesn't have to keep them doing themselves in all the time. And it is an incredible gift to be able to offer another human being. The gift of equanimity in the presence of trauma. The gift of a faith. It's faith, really. It's not beliefs, it's faith. It's a very deep faith in the unfolding of the law of the universe.